I am a vet with a message that I wish I had heard much earlier in my career. It's a message mainly for our children, but also for parents and for educators. I think we all need to listen to this message, understand it, and take action if we want to save this wonderful one world we share. A few years ago, I read a survey of UK young people that said that only 33% understood that milk came from cows. 36% associated bacon with pigs. As a vet, this bothered me. What had happened in the education system that this lack of awareness had grown? And it's not confined to the UK. In a 2021 survey here in Ireland, respondents said that they believed that only 16% of people in Ireland had a good understanding of Irish agriculture. My cousin Colm is a tillage farmer in South Kildare in Ireland. He understands farming. I met him at a family funeral a few years ago. And as you know, at funerals, family funerals, any type of funeral, there's always good conversations. I asked Colm about how the farming was going. And he said, "It is the weirdest thing, Mita. I look behind the tractor, there are no crows following the plough. There are no earthworms, the land is dead. I'm going to have to do something about it because I think I'm farming on borrowed time." As vets, we are problem solvers. We learn to solve problems in cattle, sheep, pigs, dogs, cats, and horses. But we didn't learn much about crows, and we didn't learn much about earthworms, and I didn't know how to solve Colm's problems. Another thing that people often ask vets about is animal welfare, and that's understandable. We have the healthcare of animals as our primary focus. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. In my final year in vet school, we had precisely one lecture in animal welfare. And that certainly wasn't enough to answer the questions I was being asked. I felt like an absolute imposter. So I did what any self-respecting 59-year-old does. I went back to college. And I studied for a master's in animal welfare. And what a world opened up for me. When I got my library access card, I did not have enough hours in the day to discover all the knowledge that was out there. The first thing, and probably the most important thing I realized, is that my conception of animal welfare was totally outdated. In that one lecture in final year, we had been basically told that good animal welfare is reflected in a healthy and productive animal. But nowadays, animal welfare scientists consider a concept called sentience. And sentience is the capacity to feel pleasure, to feel pain. Hands up those of you who have an animal in your life, whether it's a dog or cat at home, cattle or sheep on a farm, maybe you have horses. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up if you believe that those animals have feelings that matter to them. Good. But if I asked you about elephants, would your hands stay up? If I asked you about dolphins? Okay. What about fish? What about the crows? The crows on Colm's farm? Okay. And what about the earthworms? Well, this is the problem. Animal welfare scientists are grappling with this. How far does that sentient spectrum extend? But we are all agreed that we must look at animal welfare from the animal's point of view. The other subject, or another subject that we spent a lot of time on, unlike animal welfare, was public health. Now, public health is the study of diseases that spread from animals to humans. So you can see why it's an important subject. Those diseases are things like anthrax, TB, brucellosis, rabies, ringworm, toxoplasmosis, big long list. And in the 1980s, the study of these diseases was kind of consolidated into a topic or a concept called One Health. Because the people on the veterinary and the medical sides realize it's not just about the interaction between the animal diseases and the humans, it's also part of how the environment interacts with all of us. And that's a fine concept, and it served very well, and it actually served very well during the COVID-19 pandemic, because One Health experts came together. Ireland was one of the countries where this was very significant. They came together to figure out what was going on and played a big role in its control. But is One Health enough? Think back to Colm. When I met him at that funeral, he was physically fit and well, healthy, but he was very bothered. Mentally, he was not in a good place because he was really worried about his future in farming. Think about your pets. You provide the best of care for them, the best feed, the treats, all of that. But how do they feel about it? We need to stretch beyond One Health into a concept developed by a visionary veterinary colleague called Rebecca Garcia Pinillos, a collaborative framework called One Welfare, where we look at the animal welfare, the human well-being in the context of the environment in which we all live and share this marvellous planet. I like the idea of One Welfare because it's based on an ethic of care. To quote the father of wildlife ecology, Aldo Leopold, the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. His vision was an ethical, caring relationship between humans and nature. The letters OW stand for One Welfare, but I'd like to think that they stand for something else. They stand for old wisdom. Old wisdom that was known before the industrial age, where we implicitly knew that animals looked after the humans and humans looked after the animals. This is still known by indigenous peoples today, but I wonder, is that the knowledge that's missing in those surveys that I mentioned? How does One Welfare look in action? Because I've talked a lot about theoreticals. How does it look in action? Well, let's get back to Colm. Colm was trying to figure out what had happened to his land. And the first thing he realized was that he was using pesticides, particularly from the neonicotinoid family. Remember that term. Pesticides from the neonicotinoid family that are toxic, not just to the pests, but to the pollinating insects that are so important for crop production. In fact, 75% of the crops produced worldwide depend on pollinating insects. So he drastically reduced his use of pesticides, and he installed bee hotels like this one all around the farm, which provide nesting spaces for the solitary bee species that are so important for pollination and for biodiversity. And Colm's move into regenerative agriculture has meant the land has come back to life, the earthworms are back, the crows are back, and Colm sees a future in farming. Did you know that in the 1990s, there was a catastrophic decline in the number of scavenging vultures in India by 99%? What does this mean? This meant piles of rotting carcasses in the street. Because in India, these cattle were being treated with a painkiller called diclofenac. A diclofenac was a wonderful drug that eased the cows' sufferings in their final days. But it's toxic to vultures, and the vultures were dying of acute renal failure. Piles of rotting carcasses in the streets, runoff into the streams, a proliferation of rats and the associated diseases, a huge increase in the number of wild dog packs, wild dog bites of humans, deaths from rabies. In fact, it's estimated that something like 500,000 excess deaths were directly attributable to the loss of the vultures, the scavenging vultures in India. So, One Welfare sprang into action. Vets, doctors, ecologists, conservationists all came together to figure out what had happened, to develop a vulture conservation program, and it was agreed that the use of diclofenac for vets would be stopped in India, and the vultures are coming back. This is a picture of a flea. This is a dog flea. And when I was a young vet, and I was presented with a scratching dog, I kind of felt a bit itchy myself, But I knew that I actually didn't have much to offer. We had a pretty ineffectual flea powder. So the dog-owning world rejoiced when a product was developed that was a spot-on treatment. One drop on the skin of the dog's back, no fleas, happy owners, happy dogs. But then scientists discovered that the residue of this product, which is from the neonicotinoid family, residues stayed on the dog's coat for up to 28 days. So when you wash the dog, when you wash its bedding, when you cuddle the dog and wash your hands, residue went down the drain, through the water treatment plant, into the streams and rivers at levels toxic to wildlife. So again, One Welfare experts came together, and the solution was to only recommend these spot-on treatments when you actually see a scratching dog. This picture of these cows is probably the most upsetting picture, but it's also the one that convinced me that One Welfare is the solution. These are dairy cows in New Zealand. You can see their welfare is seriously impaired. This is a production system called winter grazing, intensive winter grazing. Unlike the EU, dairying in New Zealand is not subsidised, so theirs is a low input system. The cows are grazed on root crops in a strip grazing manner, so there's always feed in front of them. But one of the problems is dairying in New Zealand has expanded, and with the expansion means cows are now being grazed on land that actually can't carry that type of stock. It would have been land that was used for sheep or for smaller cattle. So when it works well, it's a good system. When it goes badly, this is what you see. So the impact on the environment, degradation of topsoil, runoff of effluent and nutrients into the watercourses. The impact on the cows. The cows can't trudge through the muck to get to the feed. Because they can't feed, they lose energy. Because they lose energy, they lose body condition. They have cold stress. They're lame. But for me, the most disturbing thing is that they cannot behave like cows should behave. They are not able to sit contentedly and chew the cud like cows are meant to do. And what about the impact on the farmers? No farmer worth his or her salt will want to see their animals in a situation like this. But when your livelihood is on the line, the bank is breathing down your neck, and you're being pilloried on social media, solutions can be hard to find. This is a live problem as I speak to you here today. And the solution is not easy to find because there's multiple stakeholders and multiple issues in play, but I firmly believe that a One Welfare approach offers the best chance of a way forward. So these are the facts. Everything in our world is interconnected. And when the affluent contract breaks down, we need to find a new way of looking at things, using a One Welfare lens. This is most important when we talk about our children and our children's future. There's no point in someone like me getting that library card late in life and coming here, spreading the word, one conversation at a time. My message today is that we need to embed One Welfare in education in our schools. We need to teach the children about the bees and the vultures and the fleas and the cows in New Zealand. We need to expose them to nature, to farming, to sustainability, to the broad understanding of One Welfare. One Welfare based on the old wisdom to save our one world. Thank you.